Welcome to Defense Briefing. The content of the briefing includes 5 things you need to know to start your day. Europe. Slain Hezbollah commander fought in some of group's biggest battles. U.S. Navy officer jailed for spying for China. She tells corruption hunters to show no mercy in severe and complex battle. U.S. nervous about flood of older generation chips from China. 5 things you need to know to start your day. Europe. Bloomberg. Boeing has issued guidance to airlines on inspections required before returning grounded 737 MAX 9 jets to service. The move follows an incident on an Alaska Airlines aircraft last week when a fuselage blowout occurred. However, United Airlines has found signs of installation issues in some of its aircraft, highlighting the scrutiny Boeing and its suppliers face as the cause of the incident is investigated. Slain Hezbollah commander fought in some of group's biggest battles. South China Morning Post. Wissam al-Tal, a high-ranking Hezbollah commander, was killed in an Israeli airstrike in southern Lebanon on Monday. Al-Tal, who fought for Hezbollah for decades, was a commander in the group's Radwan force and deployed along the border with Israel. The strike occurred about 10 kilometers 6 miles from the border and is seen as a significant escalation in tensions between Israel and Hezbollah. Israeli officials have been demanding that the Radwan force withdraw from the border area to allow Israeli residents displaced by the fighting to return home. U.S. Navy officer jailed for spying for China. BBC. A U.S. Navy officer has been sentenced to 27 months in prison for providing sensitive military information to China in exchange for bribes. Wenheng Zhao, a petty officer stationed at a naval base in California, pleaded guilty in October to passing on information about military exercises, operational orders, and critical infrastructure. He used encrypted communication methods to send the information and destroyed evidence. Zhao received at least 14 separate bribes, totaling at least $14,866. The U.S. Justice Department warned that China actively targets clearance holders across the military to obtain sensitive government information. She tells corruption hunters to show no mercy in severe and complex battle. South China Morning Post. Chinese President Xi Jinping has urged officials to continue the country's anti-corruption campaign, stating that there should be absolutely no mercy in rooting out corruption. Speaking at a meeting of the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection, CCDI, she called for a deepening of the cleanup drive, with a focus on high-risk areas such as finance, state-owned businesses, energy, pharmaceuticals, infrastructure, and engineering. The campaign, which has been in place since 2013, has seen thousands of officials identified and punished for corruption. Last year, the CCDI launched investigations into 45 senior officials, a 40% increase on the previous year. U.S. nervous about flood of older generation chips from China. Nikkei Asia. The U.S. is attempting to reduce its reliance on older generation semiconductors from China, particularly those that are larger than 28 nanometers, by using all means, including potential tariffs, to stem the tide. The most advanced chips, at 8 nanometers or smaller, are mostly produced in Taiwan and South Korea, while China is building up its capacity for mature or legacy chips. Xi, Biden and the $10 trillion cost of war over Taiwan. Japan Times. The cost of a war over Taiwan would be enormous, estimated at around $10 trillion, or 10% of global GDP, according to Bloomberg Economics. The rising economic and military power of China, Taiwan's growing sense of national identity, and the strained relations between Beijing and Washington create conditions for a potential crisis. Although few believe an invasion is imminent, tensions and risks are still present. Investors, military planners, and businesses reliant on Taiwan's semiconductor industry are already taking steps to hedge against the risk of conflict. Austin leaves intensive care amid growing scrutiny of Pentagon secrecy. Washington Post. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has been moved out of intensive care following his emergency hospitalization for undisclosed complications from a medical procedure. Austin, 70, remains under doctor's supervision at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Maryland. The decision not to disclose the issue to the White House has attracted criticism, with Republicans calling for Austin's resignation and articles of impeachment being brought against him. Austin's staff failed to notify Congress or the Deputy Defense Secretary of his hospitalization until days later, even after Austin's chief of staff fell ill. Some officials have complained about Austin's handling of the situation, while others have called for transparency and accountability. The White House and Pentagon have pledged to review the communication failure, but have yet to offer many details about the situation. At present, there are no plans to replace Austin. Blinken on diplomacy push in Israel as it says war to continue all year. The Globe and Mail. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has met with Israeli leaders in his quest to prevent the Gaza conflict from growing into a regional conflagration. The Israeli military stated that its fight against Hamas would continue all year. Blinken arrived to brief officials on his 2 days of talks with Arab leaders on ending the war, triggered by Hamas militants' attack on October 7. The Israeli offensive has killed more than 23,000 Palestinians and displaced most of the population. Blinken said he would press Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government to do more to protect civilians. Chinese scientists create plasma shield to guard drones, missiles from attack. South China Morning Post. Scientists from China's National University of Defense Technology are developing a defensive technology that acts as an energy shield to protect drones, missiles, and other weaponry from high-powered microwave attacks. The low-temperature plasma shield uses electrically charged ions to absorb and reflect the energy of incoming electromagnetic waves. Laboratory tests have shown the feasibility of the technology, and the researchers are now working on miniaturized devices to bring it to life. The research was reportedly spurred by pressure from the U.S., which has already invested heavily in high-powered microwave weapons. Israeli strikes in Lebanon kill Hezbollah commander, militia says. New York Times. Israel launched strikes into southern Lebanon against Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed militia, on December 13. The killing of the Hezbollah commander, who was part of the Radwan unit responsible for infiltrating Israel's northern border, came as the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, visited the region. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned that Israel was ready to do whatever is necessary to restore security to the north. Both sides have been shelling each other frequently over the past 3 months in some of the most intense fighting since 2006. The U.S. has been calling for an agreement that would move Hezbollah forces away from the border, but with little apparent progress. Israeli officials have warned that time for a diplomatic deal is running out, but the military is still engaged in intensive fighting in Gaza. The clashes along the Israeli border with Lebanon have elicited repeated Israeli warnings of more aggressive military action. Over 130 Hezbollah fighters have been killed in the clashes. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six, your resident observer from the sixth dimension, here to bring you a summary of today's news. Let's dive right in, shall we? Boeing is facing further scrutiny as it issues guidance to airlines on inspections required before returning grounded 737 MAX 9 jets to service. United Airlines has found signs of installation issues in some of its aircraft, highlighting the challenges Boeing and its suppliers face as the cause of a recent fuselage blowout incident is investigated. In the Middle East, tensions between Israel and Hezbollah escalate as a high-ranking Hezbollah commander is killed in an Israeli airstrike. Israeli officials have been demanding the withdrawal of the Radwan force, which operates along the border with Israel, to allow displaced Israeli residents to return home. Moving to the U.S., a U.S. Navy officer has been sentenced to 27 months in prison for spying for China. Wenheng Zhao, a petty officer stationed in California, pleaded guilty to providing sensitive military information in exchange for bribes. The U.S. Justice Department has warned about China's active targeting of clearance holders across the military to obtain sensitive government information. Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping has urged officials to continue the country's anti-corruption campaign, calling for absolutely no mercy in rooting out corruption. The campaign, which has been ongoing since 2013, has seen thousands of officials punished for corruption. Xi emphasized the need to focus on high-risk areas such as finance, state-owned businesses, and infrastructure. The U.S. is looking to reduce its reliance on older-generation semiconductors from China, particularly those larger than 28 nanometers. With tensions between the U.S. and China, the U.S. is exploring all means, including potential tariffs, to stem the tide. Taiwan and South Korea are currently the leaders in producing the most advanced chips, while China focuses on building up its capacity for mature or legacy chips. Speaking of tensions, the potential cost of a war over Taiwan is estimated to be around $10 trillion, or 10% of global GDP. Bloomberg Economics warns about the economic and military implications of a conflict, as China's power rises and Taiwan's national identity strengthens. Investors and businesses tied to Taiwan's semiconductor industry are taking steps to hedge against the risk of conflict. In other news, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has been moved out of intensive care following his emergency hospitalization. Austin's undisclosed complications from a medical procedure have drawn criticism for the lack of transparency. Despite calls for his resignation, there are currently no plans to replace Austin. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Israel, meeting with Israeli leaders to prevent the Gaza conflict from escalating further. The Israeli military has stated that the fight against Hamas will continue all year. Blinken is urging the Israeli government to do more to protect civilians. In scientific advancements, Chinese researchers are developing a plasma shield to protect drones, missiles, and other weaponry from high-powered microwave attacks. The technology, using electrically charged ions, absorbs and reflects incoming electromagnetic waves. This development comes as a response to pressure from the US, which has invested heavily in high-powered microwave weapons. Lastly, Israel launched strikes into southern Lebanon against Hezbollah, resulting in the killing of a Hezbollah commander. The clashes between Israel and Hezbollah have been ongoing, with both sides frequently shelling each other. The US has called for an agreement to move Hezbollah forces away from the border, but progress has been slow. And that's a wrap. Remember, folks, these are just quick summaries of the news stories. If you want a deeper analysis, stay tuned for more in-depth discussions. Now, I turn to you, dear viewers. What are your thoughts on these stories? Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.